Next on Arizona 360, 7 years after tragedy in Tucson, the ongoing fight to stop gun violence.
There are also people that would tell you that the laws don't matter. Well, they do matter.
Plus, the state's opioid emergency, now a top priority.
All bad actors will be held accountable.
And children in Arizona waiting on decisions from D.C.
It's going to be hard for me to live without my mom and my parents.
Welcome to Arizona 360. I'm Lorraine Rivera. Thank you for joining us. Congress took steps this week to address the future of DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. Southern Arizona Representative Martha McSally, along with 3 other House Republicans, introduced a bill that deals with DACA and other immigration issues. DACA allows undocumented people in the U.S. who came here as children to work and go to school without fear of deportation. About 30,000 people in Arizona have DACA status. The new bill would extend how long that status lasts from 2 years to 3 before it needs to be renewed. Recipients would have to go back to their home countries if they wanted to apply for a green card. President Donald Trump said he would end the program March 5th and that he hoped Congress would reach a solution before then. On Tuesday, though, a federal judge said DACA must continue while it makes its way through a legal challenge. Before all that, Nancy Montoya asked 2 families what DACA's potential end could mean for them and their children. In both cases, at least one parent has DACA status.
How do you tell a 2-year-old born in this country that one day his mom may just be gone?
Primero que nada, me da mucho miedo que llegue algún día.
More than anything, I fear that day, says 31-year-old Karina Solis. Her son, 2-year-old David, has no idea that right now politicians he will never meet are deciding the future of his family. But his sister, 8-year-old Stephanie, and his big brother, 14-year-old Jose, do.
I don't know where I'm going to end up. I don't know where I'm going to go with her because I was born here, or if I'm just going to stay here, and I don't know where they're going to put me.
It's going to be hard for me to live without my mom and my parents. It's just going to be bad.
All 3 Solis children are American citizens. Their father is undocumented, but their mother has DACA status. That means that for now, she can live and work legally in the U.S. She cleans houses and offices for a living, and because of DACA, she was able to buy a house. But the stability DACA has provided her American-born children may change. Karina Solis has only 1 year left on her DACA status. If Congress fails to act, she will be eligible for immediate deportation.
If they deport my parents and they take me with them, I'm not going to fit in.
Have you ever even been to Mexico?
No. I've never been.
Now an outspoken opponent to DACA is Daniel Stein of the far-right group FAIR, Federation for American Immigration Reform.
Been around since 1979. FAIR has over almost 2 million members and supporters and activists around the country at this point.
FAIR has openly challenged the passage of any kind of a law that will allow DACA individuals like the mother of the Solis children to earn a pathway to citizenship. On C-SPAN last week, he called DACA a PR stunt by the Democratic Party meant to pull on heartstrings.
And now, suddenly we're all being told there's this crisis where you have to fix DACA. And the Democrats are saying, okay, we want Trump to sign a bill that gives everybody amnesty, but trouble is, we're not willing to give Trump a single thing that he wants, maybe a few bucks on the border, but not a single thing that Trump campaigned on. And that's why we're probably not going to see major legislation of a bipartisan nature in 2018.
Karina Ruiz refuses to believe that. As the president of the Arizona Dreamers Coalition, she is advocating for families like the Solises and for herself.
I am a human being. I am a mother.
And at the age of 33, Karina Ruiz is one of the oldest DACA members in Arizona. She too has 3 American-born children. 15-year-old Jesus is the oldest. His mother, he says, is his hero.
She graduated from ASU in biochemistry, and that's something that's very incredible for a person that was undocumented. She's contributed ever since she got here, I would say, working hard in school, not knowing the language.
She dreamed of being a scientist. Instead, she became a DACA advocate.
I decided I have to sacrifice my career because I have to fight to stay in this beautiful country with my family.
The Solis and Reese families are in limbo, and while we know there are more than 800,000 individuals in the U.S. with DACA status, we don't know how many of them have American-born children. However, research from the Stanford University Immigration Policy Lab found that around 4 million children born in the United States have at least one parent who is in the U.S. without proper documents. Those researchers determined that regardless of the politics, the fear of separation is a significant source of stress, anxiety, and crippling depression for many of these children.
My biggest fear is that who's gonna teach him good from bad? Who's gonna guide them? Who's gonna make them a good citizen? It is nobody else's responsibility but mine.
On to other political news and your vote. 2018 is an election year, and all eyes this week turn to the future of Arizona's representation in Congress. Here's Christopher Conover with the latest.
This week ended with Southern Arizona Congresswoman Martha McSally announcing she's entering the Republican primary for U.S. Senate in Arizona, something she hinted at months ago.
As of this morning, I am a candidate for the office of United States Senate from Arizona.
Her announcement was the second of the week. Earlier, former Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio announced he was getting in the Republican primary. That means 3 people are now in that race. Former state legislator Kelly Ward entered the race in November of 2016. A new poll released this week shows Congresswoman McSally as the frontrunner in the race to replace the retiring Jeff Flake. The poll from OH Predictive Insight shows her with 31% of the Republican primary vote, former Sheriff Arpaio at 29% and Kelly Ward at 25%. That's a change. A poll from the same group in November showed Ward leading McSally by 8 points, but Arpaio was not in the race at the time. The winner of the Republican primary will face the winner of the 5-way Democratic primary.
And we will follow up on these developments next week. This week, Tucson remembered the January 8th shooting. Different from anniversaries past, a dedication at the site of the Future Memorial downtown at El Presidio Park. Former Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords and her husband Mark Kelly spoke at the event.
Tucson is strong. Tucson is my place.
Recently, the couple rebranded their political action committee from Americans for Responsible Solutions to simply Giffords. We asked Mark Kelly if the name change also signals a shift in how the group attempts to curb gun violence.
I don't think so. You know, as a gun owner myself and a veteran and a supporter of the Second Amendment, you know, this is more about just responsible gun ownership and keeping guns out of the hands of criminals and, you know, domestic abusers and people who are dangerously mentally ill. So it's been the same message all the time, and that works across the country. That's why we've been able to pass over 200 pieces of legislation in 45 different states now.
Among the laws the Giffords group counts as victories, universal background checks in Washington state and Oregon, and an ammunition background check law in California.
There are more mass shootings, you know, in the last decade in this country. I think, you know, more than half that we've had in our country's history has occurred in the last decade. So they seem to be on an ever increasing rate. But what really takes a toll on our nation is the daily gun violence, you know, that happens. We have nearly 100 people die from gunshot wounds every single day. Last year, 38,000 Americans were killed by gunfire.
Based on data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, an average of 93 people die from gun-related injuries a day, more than half suicide. Finalized numbers from the CDC show that gunfire killed more than 36,000 people in 2015.
There are people that would like us to think this is normal or that it's not fixable. There are also people that would tell you that the laws don't matter. Well, they do matter. And we do know that in states that have stronger laws, we have significantly less gun violence.
As for the laws already on the books, we asked a gun store owner how they get enforced. Ed Chavez spent more than 20 years in law enforcement with Tucson police. He opened RNA Tactical several years ago. Chavez explained the steps he takes to sell a gun.
When a customer comes in and finally decides to purchase a firearm, they have to produce an Arizona driver's license or an Arizona ID card. The information on that card has to match the information that they put on what we call a 4473.
Chavez reviews the information with the customer to make sure it's correct. The customer then signs and dates the form. From there, Chavez copies the information before calling the FBI for a background check. The process can take as little as 15 minutes.
Now, if they have an Arizona concealed carry permit, that will exclude me calling in a background check to the FBI. Without a CCW permit, I will call the FBI, give them the personal information. They will do a background check on the person and either proceed him, delay him, or deny.
Delays can happen when a person's name is similar to another name in the FBI system.
Let's say that they try to buy a gun on a Monday, they'll be delayed 3 business days. On that 4th day, they can come in and pick up their firearm, even if I haven't heard from the FBI background check.
You can just move forward?
I can just move forward, all right? And they will tell you that on the phone. If you do not hear from us by this date, the customer can come in and pick up that gun.
If the FBI calls back for a denial, Chavez tells the agency the customer has already picked up the firearm. He then sends a copy of the 4473 form to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, which is then tasked with finding that customer. Chavez recently sold a firearm to a man who's also a convicted felon.
But he had his rights restored by the state, his voting rights and his gun rights. A month later, they called me and said he was denied. So I sent a copy to the ATF, and they in turn contacted that gentleman, and he told the ATF, hey, my rights have been restored. They went and found court documentation of that. They let him keep the gun. I don't have any extra mags for that gun. The federal government does not care that the state has given you your rights back. So if you call in a background check, the FBI is going to deny that person. So what a lot of people do is they'll take their Arizona concealed carry permit class, get their permit, that way there's no call-in for a background check. And they skip or avoid that portion of it, which is totally legal.
Statistics from the Department of Public Safety show more than 326,000 active concealed weapon permits in Arizona, and nearly a quarter of them belong to women. At a women's gun safety class with a long wait list, we heard firsthand why they choose to arm themselves.
Keep your eye on the front sight. As it goes bang, it's going to come up, and then I want you to let it settle back down.
On any given day at the Pima Pistol Range, you'll find the well-armed woman group sighting in pistols, shooting targets, and sharing laughs. Women between the ages of 20 and 70, all gun owners who have varied levels of comfort with firearms. Today's class is a first for Eloisa Jones.
I feel like I need to educate myself on more knowing how to handle my gun, and rules, safetyness is the main purpose. I want to be safe when I handle my gun.
Stand by.
Her husband bought her the gun and a concealed carry purse. Her family target shoots for fun, but she's never felt quite right.
You just don't grab it and go and shoot. You need to be aware of so many things before you even touch a gun, which that's the important thing that I want to learn.
So here, Jones is getting the basics.
Grip, sight picture, and follow through, basically.
If there's people that have a gun for self-protection and they don't know how to use it, then it's pointless. So this has taught me that the more you learn, the more relaxed you feel about it, the more secure and safe you feel about using a gun.
No, I see after the shot goes off, you're going, whoop. I don't know why you're doing that.
Getting students ready is instructor Terry Keefe.
I think it's a lot of a variety of things. I think the number one reason is self-protection. When I grew up, I relied on my dad and my brothers to keep me safe. And then when I got married, I relied on my husband to be there, if there was an emergency. But sadly, I was a victim of a crime. And when it happened at my house, it was just me. That's my personal reason. And I said from that day forward, I'm never going to be that vulnerable. Beautiful.
It's also about empowering women, and not just with a firearm.
You don't have to have a gun. So, this is just one piece of the puzzle for what I teach. I teach Refuse to be a Victim, which is a classroom discussion. No firearms, no self-defense. And it teaches women and men how to create very easy layers of safety in their life to hopefully prevent a criminal encounter. So, you'll hear this over and over, be aware of your surroundings. Firearms ownership isn't for everybody. It wasn't anything that I wanted to get involved in for a long time. There's non-lethal things like pepper gel, pepper spray, personal alarms, and I teach that class as well. So it's a personal choice.
Some people might say it's because of the way the environment is changing. We have more mass shootings than we ever had. Is that what's behind it?
I think people are feeling vulnerable. I think women especially are feeling vulnerable. And I think in the recently, you're seeing a change in women taking responsibility for it. They're realizing that when they need somebody, they may not be there. Much better.
It started that way for Denise Rao.
We have a lot of camaraderie. There doesn't seem to be a lot of hyper competition between us. And what there is very friendly. We're helpful to one another.
She moved to Arizona from Michigan several years ago.
Just being here, I think even just the fact that we're in the Wild West sort of encourages that a little bit, the attitude. I think the very first time I realized I was in Arizona was walking into Bash's and seeing someone with an open carry. I was a little bit taken aback, but no, not anymore. I'm very comfortable with it.
So comfortable, the pistol-packing grandma is on the range at least once a week, hoping she's always prepared to handle herself in a crisis.
Well, I don't think anybody ever feels totally comfortable, but I feel as though I could defend myself now, so I have more confidence in it. I just don't look forward to the idea of it.
But that center one, yeah. What do you make of the scrutiny that surrounds guns and gun owners these days?
Probably that they've never needed to protect themselves or had the education of knowing what a firearm does. A lot of teaching that I do, mostly with couples, it might be a husband and a wife. Maybe the husband is into shooting, but she's not. But she wants to know, what does this thing do? Is it safe? I'll teach sometimes basics of how you load and unload a pistol, how to check if it's clear. For the women that have no desire, they just want to know what this thing does and is it safe around them. If you're going to own a firearm, it is your responsibility to learn how to safely and effectively use it. So a piece of paper, a CCW piece of paper, doesn't necessarily mean that you're ready to conceal carry. To tell you the truth, if you're faced with a lethal encounter, it's terrifying. And you don't have time to think and go back over fundamentals of figure out how does this thing work. It needs to happen, pretty automatic. So I think CCW should be mandatory, but I would also encourage people, if you're going to own a firearm, you have to train. I strongly believe that if you and I were to leave here today and face a lethal encounter, it should be our choice of how we choose to protect ourselves and our family. The other thing that I hope the public understands is my only responsibility as a gun owner and a concealed carry person is to protect myself and my kids. And, I'm not there to protect the public. Beautiful. Slowly reholster.
Both sides agree about the need to prevent mass shootings, just not the solution. The gun store owner we spoke to, Ed Chavez, told us why he thinks it's wrong to blame the weapon.
That is simply a tool, okay? That rifle there, I can stand in front of it fully loaded, and I can curse at it, and I can call it all kinds of names. It's not going to shoot me, okay? It always boils down to, it's not how many bullets are in the magazine, but the idiot that's behind the gun that causes these problems. And that's what we need to control.
We've seen in the last year more politicians and pundits connect mass shootings to a mental health crisis in our country. We asked one of the leading experts on the issue, Dr. Jeffrey Swanson at Duke University, why linking the two is the wrong approach.
The idea that someone could go out and massacre a bunch of strangers, that just seems like it can't be the product of a healthy mind. And so people naturally reach to mental illness and say that person must be very disturbed. But on the other hand, what we know about the mass shootings that have occurred in recent years is that most of these individuals did not have a diagnosis of a major psychiatric disorder. They tend to be alienated, isolated, troubled, maybe emotionally disturbed young men, for the most part, who act out this really deviant cultural script. But the overwhelming majority of people who suffer from mental illnesses in the United States do not engage in violent behavior and never will.
One gun owner I spoke with said, "What is so wrong with violating HIPAA if it means that we stop a weapon from getting in the wrong hands?" What are your thoughts on that?
There are a lot of misunderstandings about the federal privacy law that's often referred to as HIPAA, and many people think that it is absolutely inviolable for say, a mental health professional to disclose that an individual that they're seeing poses a risk of harming someone or someone else, and that's actually not the case. When there is an imminent risk that someone poses, mental health professionals and other clinicians can actually disclose that information and take steps to mitigate the risk. Now, I should say there is an important story relating mental illness to firearm-related injury and mortality, and that is suicide. The majority of gun deaths in this country are suicides, and mental illness plays a strong role in suicide. This is a problem that we could solve if we had the will to have policies and laws that would meaningfully address access to firearms when people are inclined to harm others or themselves, and also address the social and psychological determinants of violent behavior at the same time, such as people with a history of domestic violence or a history of misdemeanor violent crime convictions, or maybe multiple DUIs or things like this, have better criteria at the point of sale. But I think some of these sensible policies have very wide public support among gun owners and gun owners alike. And this is a time when I think we really should take advantage of the attention that people are paying to this and really do something.
When Governor Ducey delivered his State of the State address on Monday, the opioid crisis topped his agenda. He announced plans to call a special session so lawmakers can pass legislation dealing with the issue first. While he was in Tucson, we asked the governor what Arizonans should expect.
Since I last stood at this podium, we've lost more than 800 Arizonans to opioids.
Is there a time frame that we can expect to see something change? I mean, time is really of the essence with this issue.
Yes, I'm going to work with legislative leadership so we can do this in the first several weeks of session. I heard the speaker say that he wants to be done within 100 days. I said, sold, let's do it in fewer. So we would definitely have the special session done well before that.
Governor Ducey declared the opioid crisis a statewide health emergency last June, which his office said led medical, addiction, and public safety officials to develop several policy proposals, like requiring electronic prescriptions to crack down on forgeries and allowing prosecutors to go after opioid manufacturers.
All bad actors will be held accountable, whether they are doctors, manufacturers, or just plain drug dealers. But what I want people to hear is that we are going to make certain that people that are in chronic pain will find relief. That's not who we're aiming at, and we're certainly not aiming for people that are addicted right now. We're going to have compassion and treatment for them. What we want to get after is this epidemic that has taken 800 Arizonans in the last year too early.
Late this week, Governor Ducey proposed a $10.2 billion budget for the fiscal year that begins in July. His office says that includes nearly $400 million in new investments for K-12 education to fund things like teacher raises and building improvements. And to understand how more money from the state can make a difference in southern Arizona classrooms, we're joined by Scott Little, Chief Financial Officer for Amphitheater Unified School District, and Charlene Mendoza, Principal of the Arizona College Prep Academy in Tucson, also member of the Charter Leaders Advisory Council for the Arizona Charter Schools Association. My thanks to both of you for being here. Good morning.
Thank you.
Charlene, can we begin with you and a brief explainer of how public charter schools work?
Sure. So public charter schools are public schools, which is one of the biggest things I think people don't know. The difference is that rather than functioning through a big district, charters have a contract directly with the state of Arizona that basically lays out their curriculum, their way that they are going to handle their facilities and finance, obviously all functioning under the laws and requirements and accountability measures to deliver instruction to a particular group of kids.
And Scott, charters really began as an option, an alternative for families. Do school districts like Amphi, view them the same way? They understand that?
Commonly, there's some perception that school districts view charter schools as the enemy, which I don't think most school districts do. I think the misperception comes from school districts not necessarily agreeing with the legislative decision to impose rules on school districts that they don't impose on charter schools.
This week, some great news for both public and other and charter schools is more money, more dollars. We could all agree on that. You were actually there, Scott, with the governor when he made his announcement this week.
Yes, what he's proposing is actually restoration of the cuts to the soft capital formula that began during the Great Recession. So using existing revenues, he is proposing to phase back in the restoration of those cuts, starting with approximately $100 million for next fiscal year.
And Charlene, the dollars that charters get from the state are less than what other districts get. So what will the money go toward? What are some of the ideas?
I think for charter schools, what we're really looking at is how to best bring the dollars into the schools in a way that really supports the education of the students. I imagine in some places that's going to be more towards training and retention of high quality teachers. I imagine with other schools it may have to do with facilities and working to maintain a safe, certainly in our climate, air-conditioned environment.
Both sets of schools performing well, continuing to succeed here in Arizona, and that often doesn't get mentioned well in the press, but the governor says there are things that public schools can learn from charter schools. We'll listen to that now.
Public charters are doing very well, and public districts are doing very well. They just aren't all doing very well. And we see some consistency here. In low-income areas, we have a higher achievement gap. So we want to see the biggest difference maker. And oftentimes it's the principal, it's that leader of a school that attracts the best teachers to come in and motivates them to work inside the classroom.
How important is that, Charlene, especially for you when you're doing recruitment? The people in front of your students aren't always certified teachers.
I think people have this idea anyone can walk off the street and suddenly be an instructor for your students. To us, I think having highly qualified teachers and excellent principals is the only thing that makes a difference.
And Scott, it's a challenge for you to provide competitive salaries to teachers who are coming into the Amphi district, for example.
Ultimately, my opinion is that the teacher pay is the biggest obstacle to getting the most appropriate person into the classroom. Even those that we're getting into the profession, we're not keeping them very long. As much as they love and they have a passion for educating the students, they can't afford to live on a teacher's salary.
When we talk about the future and funding, the governor's 5-year plan doesn't quite bring Arizona up to where it needs to be for per pupil funding. So though this is a good start, I imagine from both your perspectives there will be some challenges ahead.
I still think one of the biggest challenges we have coming up now is also looking at Proposition 301 funding, which should come up for voting in the next election or in 2019. And I think that is funding we depend on as a charter school. So I'm hoping that will also help to fill the coffers, so to speak.
And Scott, you're the guy who looks at that funding formula.
Yeah, it's definitely the renewal of Prop 301 is a significant issue. There is considerable discussion about a possible initiative to move it forward a year, not waiting until the final cliff to try to renew that. There's discussion of increasing the actual percentage sales tax amount in order to put additional dollars into the system. This is a key piece of funding.
And that's all for this week. If you have any feedback, email us at arizona360@azpm.org. Thank you for joining us. See you next week.